The Pittsburgh Steelers have made their first truly, at all reasonably surprising or interesting move of roster cut deadline day. At least it's been reported, as they traded 2015 third-round pick Sammie Coates to the Cleveland Browns for a 2018 sixth-round pick. And they gave the Browns, in addition to Coates, a 2019 seventh-round pick. So what we're seeing now is the end of Sammie Coates' career in Pittsburgh. He was battling Justin Hunter, ostensibly, for a roster spot. To a lesser degree, guys like DeMarcus Ayers and Heyward-Bey. Not all those guys are necessarily going to make the roster at this point, but the fact that Sammie Coates is gone definitely frees up, at least one of maybe one or two spots left on the Steelers roster for wide receivers. Earlier we were talking about, in previous editions of this conversation, we talked about the Steelers probably keeping 5 or 6 wide receivers tops. 4 of those guys are really accounted for. You have Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Eli Rogers. Those guys are all locked, set, sealed on the roster. Then you're figuring out, okay, do they have room for a 6th guy? They're definitely going to have a 5th guy, and who is that? For me, we heard earlier today that DeMarcus Ayers, ESPN reported that he would be released and potentially be a practice squad candidate. Ayers would be one of those guys for that 6th spot. I think if there's going to be a 5th spot, it's now down to Justin Hunter, Darius Heyward-Bey. Heyward-Bey really doesn't offer a lot to the Steelers on offense, other than the fact that he knows all the positions. Justin Hunter is a very, very one-dimensional receiver. He's really just going to be that target guy. He has practiced elsewhere, but primarily he would be a backup to Martavis Bryant. Darius Heyward-Bey would also be that, but he can play in the slot, and he can play even Antonio Brown's position, should Brown, for whatever reason, not be on the field or want to rest or just need to not practice that day. He, I think, would be the 5th guy between Justin Hunter and Darius Heyward-Bey, and then the 6th guy knocking on, especially with Kobe Hamilton having been cut. I think you're then looking at either Darius Heyward-Bey, if he doesn't get that 5th spot, or DeMarcus Ayers as potentially a punt returner. The reason I think Ayers still has a chance, even though I just told you he has been cut, is because the Steelers, I think, are going to put someone back on the 53-man roster, or back on the 53-man roster, after having taken a guy that makes the initial 53-man roster on the short-term injured reserve, meaning the NFL now allows teams to, if a guy is on the roster at the beginning of the season, so they consider that to be today at 4 o'clock. If the guy is on the roster at the beginning of the season, he can then be put on the IR and eventually designated to come back later in the year. I think 8 weeks is about the mark. Cameron Sutton suffered a hamstring injury against the Panthers in the preseason finale. Mike Mitchell's been nursing some sort of leg injury. Those guys could come back, and that would be open up a spot conceivably for a guy like DeMarcus Ayers. All of this is the knock-on effect of what we're talking about, which is the Steelers just announced they've traded Sammie Coates, a guy they drafted in the 3rd round in 2015, to the Cleveland Browns for a 2018 6th-round pick. They gave the Browns a 2019 7th-round pick. Coates' legacy in Pittsburgh, 2 years, as long as it may be, is kind of mixed. As a rookie, he didn't even know the playbook well enough in the first 2 games to actually get an active roster spot over Tyler Murphy, who was a converted college quarterback from Boston College and previously Florida. He did eventually catch 1 pass for 11 yards later that season, but really was a non-factor in his first year. However, with Martavis Bryant suspended in 2016, Coates was one of the most statistically productive receivers in the NFL through the first 5 weeks of the regular season. He had 21 catches for 435 yards. He caught a couple touchdowns. He was a guy who showed that he could take the top off of an opposing defense. However, he struggled with he got his finger broken against the Jets, which was actually his best game. He later had another finger broken. He had hernia surgery after the season to do with a hernia. And it just was not the same. He didn't really perform particularly well in training camp. He was coming off of a knee scope, and he didn't really make any plays in preseason games either. I think he had a couple, mid-range catches, a couple cuts, get out of bounds, tackle, that sort of thing. So it did not show that he could be a difference maker in the Steelers offense. And if they can trust Justin Hunter to be a sort of, relatively poor man's Martavis Bryant, they don't need Sammie Coates. So they gave up a round a year later and got a 6th-round draft pick next year for him from the Cleveland Browns, who they just got Joe Hayden from. So lots of traffic on I-90 coming up in terms of Steelers roster moves, or rather there has been the past couple of days. We'll keep an eye on more for you. Do go to PennLive.com/Steelers and check out our coverage. We've got a live post going for you on everything that's happened, all the guys that have been cut. You can also check out all our posts on this page or our previous videos on this page to see some of the things that have gone down. But for those of you just joining us, Sammie Coates has been traded by the Pittsburgh Steelers to the Cleveland Browns. In return, the Browns sent the Steelers a 2018 6th-round pick. The Steelers also threw in a 2019 7th-round pick. So a guy that's not making the Steelers roster this year got exchanged for a couple of guys that may not make either roster several years down the road. The Browns continue to stockpile draft picks. This one just about as late as possible in the draft. That's all I've got. I will be checking back in with you throughout the day. If you have any questions about what's happening with the Steelers, their roster cut downs, anything of that nature. Yeah, the Steelers, someone says they loved Kobe Hamilton. He could be back on the practice squad. I don't think they would bring him back to the 53-man roster. He would be one of 4 roster extensions you can have on your 10-man practice squad. But other than that, yeah, Kobe Hamilton's time in Pittsburgh, at least on the 53-man roster, appears to be over for now. Anyway, Jacob Klinger, PennLive Steelers beat reporter, signing off. Talk to y'all later.